After my son was lowered into the ground, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, didn't shed a single tear. Instead, she turned to me with a cold smile and said, "You are homeless now, old man." She promised to leave me penniless, to erase me from the family, as if I were a stain on her perfect life. But she made one fatal calculation error. She thought I was just a senile retired engineer. She didn't know that the lawyer holding my son's will was following my instructions, not hers. When he read the final clause of the testament, the color drained from her face so fast she fainted right on the office floor. Because that clause didn't just leave her with nothing. It left her with a $50 million debt she could never repay. Before I tell you how I destroyed her greedy empire, please hit like and subscribe if you believe that greed always comes with a price. My name is Albert Dunning and I am 73 years old. I have built the foundations for some of the tallest skyscrapers in Chicago. I spent 40 years calculating structural loads, analyzing wind shear, and ensuring that massive steel and glass giants could withstand the most brutal Midwestern storms. Yet on that Tuesday afternoon at Oak Ridge Cemetery, I felt the ground beneath my own feet crumble into dust. The rain was relentless. It wasn't a soft drizzle, but a hard, punishing downpour that turned the cemetery grass into a slick, muddy mess. It felt as though the sky itself was trying to wash away the pain of burying my only son, Brandon. Most of the mourners had already retreated to their cars, eager to escape the weather and the uncomfortable reality of death. But I stood there, my hand gripping the handle of my cane so tightly. My knuckles turned white. I watched the mahogany casket disappear into the dark earth. That box held my boy, my Brandon, the boy I had taught to ride a bike on the gravel paths of Lake Forest, the man I had funded and guided to start his technology company, the son I had loved more than my own life. And now he was gone at 45, his heart giving out from stress and overwork. I expected a hand on my shoulder. I expected a word of shared grief from the woman standing under the large black umbrella a few feet away. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She was dressed in an impeccable black designer coat that probably cost more than my first car. Her face was dry, her makeup was perfect, untouched by the downpour. There was no redness in her eyes, no tremble in her lip. She looked less like a grieving widow and more like a CEO waiting for a board meeting to conclude. The priest finished his final prayer. The workers stepped forward with shovels. That was the moment Vanessa finally moved. She didn't step toward the grave to throw a flower. She stepped toward me. Her high heels sank slightly into the sod, but she maintained her balance with a terrifying grace. She signaled to her driver, a large man with a thick neck who was holding the umbrella over her head, to step back. She wanted to deliver this message personally. "Albert," she said. Her voice was low, cutting through the sound of the rain like a serrated knife. It didn't have a shred of warmth. "Do not bother getting in the limousine." I blinked, water dripping from the brim of my old hat onto my nose. I assumed I had misheard her over the thunder. I asked her what she meant. I assumed we were going back to the house for the reception. There were guests coming. There was food to be served. It was tradition. "There is no we." "Albert," she replied, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle on her glove. "And there is no reception for you. I have instructed the driver to take you wherever you want to go, as long as it is not my house." The words took a moment to register. "Your house," I repeated. My mind was foggy with grief, but the engineer inside me was trying to process the data. That house, the sprawling estate in Lake Forest, was the home my late wife, Catherine, and I had bought 40 years ago. It was the home where Brandon grew up. When Catherine passed and Brandon married Vanessa, I had legally transferred the title to Brandon as a wedding gift, keeping only the right to live in the converted guest annex at the back of the property. It was my home. My books were there, my clothes, Catherine's pictures. Vanessa let out a short, sharp sigh, as if she were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. Listen to me carefully, because I am only going to say this once. You are not going back there. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. I have already had a cleaning crew pack your things. They are currently sitting in garbage bags on the curb outside the estate gates. If you are not there to collect them in an hour, I have instructed the sanitation department to treat them as bulk refuse. I stared at her. The cruelty was so absolute, so naked that it stole the air from my lungs. I asked her why she was doing this. I asked her how she could do this, on the day we buried her husband, my son. Because I can, she said simply. Her eyes were cold, devoid of humanity. For 10 years, I have tolerated you living in that backyard like a parasite. I tolerated your stories, your presence, your old man's smell. I did it because Brandon insisted he had this pathetic attachment to you. But Brandon is dead. Albert, the buffer is gone. I am the sole owner of that estate now, and I am cleaning house. You are the first item on the disposal list. The rain intensified, drumming against the umbrellas of the few remaining guests who were watching us from a distance, wondering what the widow and the father were discussing. They probably thought she was comforting me. They couldn't see the venom dripping from her lips. I straightened my back, my spine popped, a painful reminder of my age, but I refused to cower. I told her she couldn't do this. I told her that legally I had a right to the annex, that Brandon and I had a verbal agreement, that my name was on the original deed history. Vanessa laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. A verbal agreement. She mocked. You really are senile. Brandon didn't tell you, did he? Of course he didn't. He was too weak. He didn't want to hurt his daddy's feelings. She took a step closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and rain. Last month, Brandon refinanced the house. He took out a massive mortgage to cover the losses his company was bleeding. He needed my signature to do it, and I made a condition. The condition was that the property title be put in my name as the primary holder with full rights of survivorship. I felt my knees buckle. Brandon had been in financial trouble. He had never told me. He always came to dinner with a smile, driving his luxury cars, talking about expansion. He had leveraged our family home, my legacy, to save his business. And in doing so, he had handed the weapon to this woman. So you see, Albert, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, the bank owns the house, and I own the equity. You have zero legal standing. You are a trespasser, and if you step foot on my property, I will have you arrested for harassment. I have already spoken to the local police chief. He is a close friend of my tennis partner. He knows you have been unstable lately. Unstable. She was planting the seeds. She was painting the narrative. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized I didn't know this woman at all. For a decade she had eaten at my table, smiled at my jokes, and pretended to be a part of this family. All the while, she was just waiting for the obstacle to be removed. The obstacle was my son. I looked around the cemetery. The last of the cars were pulling away. I was being abandoned in the rain, but my concern shifted. It shifted from my house to the only thing that mattered more. Tyler, my grandson. He was 10 years old. He was standing near the black limousine, holding the hand of his nanny, a young woman named Sarah, who looked terrified. Tyler was crying. He was looking at me, his small face wet with rain and tears. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too big for him, looking so much like Brandon at that age. It made my heart ache physically. I needed to get to him. I needed to tell him that Grandpa wasn't leaving him. I ignored Vanessa and started walking toward the car. My cane sank into the mud with every step, but I pushed forward. I called out his name, Tyler. Grandpa is here. Tyler tried to run to me. He pulled his hand away from the nanny. Grandpa! He shouted. His voice was the only pure things in this entire wretched afternoon. But before he could take 2 steps, a wall of black wool blocked his path. One of the bodyguards, a man I had seen guarding Brandon at corporate events, stepped between us. He didn't look me in the eye. He just stood there. A human barricade. I stopped. I tried to move around him. I told him to step aside. I told him that was my grandson. The bodyguard didn't move. He looked over my head at Vanessa for instructions. Get the boy in the car, Vanessa barked from behind me. The nanny grabbed Tyler's arm. She wasn't gentle. She dragged him toward the open door of the limousine. Tyler screamed for me. He reached out his hand, his fingers grasping at the wet air. Grandpa, help me. Where are you going? I lunged. For a second, the rage gave me the strength of a younger man. I raised my cane, ready to strike the bodyguard if I had to. I needed to hold that boy. I needed to promise him we would be okay, but the bodyguard was faster and stronger. He didn't hit me. He didn't have to. He simply extended a massive hand and shoved me backwards. I lost my footing in the slick mud. I went down hard, landing on my hip. The pain shot through my leg like a bolt of lightning. My hat flew off into a puddle. Mud seeped instantly into my suit, the same suit I had worn to my wife's funeral. I lay there, gasping for air, the rain beating down on my face. I watched helplessly as the nanny shoved Tyler into the back seat. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off his cries. Vanessa walked past me. She didn't look down. She didn't offer a hand. She stopped just long enough to drop a white envelope onto my chest. It was already getting soaked. "Take this," she said. "Consider it a severance package for your years of service as a grandfather." She got into the car, the engine purred to life. The tires spun slightly on the wet asphalt before finding traction. I watched the taillights of the Mercedes fade into the gray mist, taking my son's body in the ground and my grandson's life in the car, leaving me with nothing but the mud on my back. I struggled to sit up. My hip was throbbing with a dull, sickening ache. I reached for my cane, using it to leverage myself off the ground. I was an old man. I was wet, dirty, and alone I picked up the envelope Vanessa had dropped. It was heavy, thick paper. I opened it, shielding it from the rain with my body. Inside, there was no check, there was no letter of apology. There was a single ticket, a Greyhound bus ticket, one way to Florida. I stared at it. Florida, the cliché destination for the forgotten elderly. She wasn't just kicking me out. She was exiling me. She wanted me hundreds of miles away, rotting in some cheap retirement home, waiting to die, so she wouldn't have to deal with the guilt of seeing me on the street. I checked the time on the ticket. The bus left in 3 hours. She had planned this perfectly. I reached into my pocket for my wallet. My hands were shaking, partly from the cold, partly from the shock. I needed to check my finances. I needed a plan. I pulled out my phone. The screen was wet but functional. I opened my banking app, access denied. I tried again, account frozen, my heart hammered against my ribs. I had a joint account with Brandon. It was meant to be for emergencies, for house maintenance. Most of my pension went into it to help cover the utility bills for the estate. I tried my personal credit card, declined. She had moved fast, with Brandon dead and the accounts likely frozen for probate. Or perhaps she had reported suspicious activity. I was locked out. I opened my wallet. I counted the cash, $214. That was it. That was the sum total of Albert Dunning's life at 73 years old. $200 and a bus ticket to a place I didn't know. I stood there in the rain for a long time. The cemetery workers were filling the grave now, their shovels creating a rhythmic scraping sound. They looked at me with pity. I hated that look. I didn't want pity. I was an engineer. I solved problems. I built structures that withstood hurricanes, and now my own life had collapsed. But as I stood there, wiping the mud from my face, something shifted inside me. The grief was still there, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it, a cold, hard ember began to glow. Vanessa thought she had calculated everything. She thought she had accounted for every variable. She saw an old man, weak and dependent. She forgot who I was. She forgot that before I was a grandfather, I was the man who designed the security protocols for Dunning Tech, my son's company. She forgot that while she was busy shopping and attending galas, I was in the annex on my secure server, monitoring the back end of the empire she thought she now controlled. I looked at the bus ticket one last time, then I crumpled it up and threw it into the mud next to my son's grave. "I am not going to Florida," I whispered to the fresh earth. "I am going to war." I limped toward the cemetery gates. I didn't have a car. Vanessa had likely taken the keys to my sedan, which was parked at the estate. I had to walk to the main road to hail a cab. My hips screamed with every step, but I forced myself to move. Pain was just a signal. It could be ignored. I needed shelter. I needed a base of operations. And I needed to disappear before she realized I hadn't taken the bus. I found a motel off the interstate, about 10 miles from the estate. It was called the Starlight Inn, a name that was hilariously optimistic for a place that smelled of stale tobacco and desperation. The neon sign flickered with a buzzing sound that set my teeth on edge. I walked into the lobby, dripping water onto the linoleum floor. The clerk, a young man with piercings and a look of supreme boredom, barely looked up from his phone. "Room for one," I said, cash. He looked at my muddy suit. He looked at the cane, $40 a night. He grunted, $10 deposit for the key. I handed him $50. That left me with $164, enough for food for a week if I was careful. enough to survive while I formulated my counterattack. I took the key, room 104. It was on the ground floor, which was good because I didn't think I could manage stairs. I walked into the room. It was small, cold, and depressing. The carpet was a shade of brown that probably wasn't the original color. The bed sagged in the middle. I went into the bathroom. The mirror was cracked. I looked at myself. I saw an old man with gray hair plastered to his skull. Mud smeared on his cheek, eyes red and hollow. I looked like a vagrant. I looked like exactly what Vanessa wanted me to be. I turned on the faucet. The water came out rusty at first, then cleared. I stripped off my ruined suit. I washed the mud from my body with a bar of soap that was as thin as a wafer. The water was lukewarm, but it felt like heaven compared to the freezing rain. I washed the suit in the sink, scrubbing the fabric until my hands were raw. The mud from Oak Ridge Cemetery dissolved into the soapy water, turning it a dark, murky brown. As I scrubbed, my arthritic fingers cried out in protest, a dull, throbbing ache that matched the beat of my heart. This was my funeral suit, the very suit I had worn to bury Catherine 5 years ago. It was a custom-tailored Italian wool suit, a gift from Brandon on my 70th birthday. He had been so proud to buy it for me, laughing and saying that the chief engineer of Dunning Tech needed to look the part. Now it was caked in cemetery mud, and I was washing it in a cracked motel sink with a bar of cheap soap. I scrubbed and scrubbed, tears of sheer exhaustion and grief finally spilling down my cheeks, mixing with the soapy water. I hung it over the shower rail to dry, smoothing out the fabric as best as I could. It was the only set of clothes I had. If I was going to fight legal battles, I needed to look presentable. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a thin towel. The silence of the room was heavy. This was my reality now. No home, no family, no money. I reached for the landline phone on the bedside table. I needed to call Radcliffe. Mr. Radcliffe was Brandon's corporate attorney, but he was also an old friend of mine from the days when we played golf at the club before I retired and became a recluse. Radcliffe was a shark. He knew where the bodies were buried because he had usually dug the holes. I dialed his office number from memory. It rang and rang. Finally, a voicemail picked up. You have reached the office of Harrison Radcliffe. I am currently out of the country on sabbatical in the Swiss Alps until the 15th of the month. For urgent matters, please contact my junior associate, David Chen. I slammed the phone down. The 15th. That was next week. Vanessa had timed this. She knew Radcliffe was away. She knew she had a window of opportunity to consolidate her power, to sell off assets, to lock me out before the heavy hitters could get involved. She was smarter than I gave her credit for. Or more likely, she had help. Vanessa wasn't a strategist. She was a consumer. Someone was guiding her. Someone who knew the company, knew the accounts, and knew Radcliffe's schedule. I lay back on the lumpy mattress. The isolation was starting to set in. I was truly alone. I thought about Tyler. Was he crying himself to sleep? Did he think I had abandoned him? The thought made my chest tighten. The next morning, I was woken by a loud pounding on the door. My heart jumped. Had Vanessa sent her goons to finish the job? Had she decided that exile wasn't enough? I grabbed my cane, holding it like a club. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I stood in the small motel room, the neon sign of the Starlight Inn still buzzing outside the window. I moved to the door and peered through the peephole. It wasn't a goon. It was a police officer. I opened the door, keeping the chain on. Can I help you? Officer, I asked, my voice raspy from sleep. Albert Dunning, he asked. He looked uncomfortable. He held a clipboard. Yes, I said. Sir, I need you to sign this. I undid the chain and opened the door. The morning light was harsh. People in the parking lot were loading up cars. The officer handed me a document. What is this? I asked, reaching for my reading glasses, only to realize I had left them in the annex. I squinted at the paper. It is a temporary restraining order, the officer said. Filed by Mrs. Vanessa Dunning. I felt the blood drain from my face. A restraining order. On what grounds? The officer shifted his weight. The complaint alleges that you have a history of dementia-induced aggression. It states that yesterday, at the cemetery, you attempted to assault a security guard and threatened to kidnap the minor child, Tyler Dunning. I whispered, absolute malicious lies. I tried to hug my grandson. That guard pushed me. The officer held up a hand. Sir, I am not the judge, I am just serving the papers. You are ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from the residence at 12 Oak Lane from Mrs. Vanessa Dunning and from the minor child, Tyler Dunning. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. Sign here to acknowledge receipt. My hand shook as I signed. This was her masterstroke. She wasn't just kicking me out. She was criminalizing me. She was creating a paper trail of mental instability. If I tried to go back to the house to get my laptop, my files or my evidence, I would go to jail. If I tried to see Tyler to tell him the truth, I would go to jail. She had built a wall around my life. I watched the officer walk back to his cruiser. I stood in the doorway of the motel room, holding the paper that legally branded me a danger to my own family. I went back inside and sat at the small round table. I looked my suitcase. It was a small carry-on I had grabbed for the hospital when Brandon had his heart attack. It had a change of underwear, a toothbrush, and a few toiletries. But it had a false bottom. I unzipped the lining of the suitcase. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a laptop, not a consumer model you buy at Best Buy. This was a ruggedized, military-grade machine with encryption protocols that I had written myself. It was my backup, my black box. Vanessa thought she had cut my supply lines. She thought locking the bank accounts and changing the house locks was enough. She thought taking my keys meant I couldn't get in. She didn't understand that I didn't need keys to enter the house. I had built the house's digital nervous system. I had installed the smart security, the cameras, the servers, and like any good engineer, I had left a back door. I opened the laptop, I booted it up. The screen glowed blue in the dim motel room. I bypassed the motel's insecure Wi-Fi and connected via the laptop's built-in satellite uplink, a perk from my days consulting for defense contractors. I typed in a string of commands. The screen flickered, then resolved into a grid of video feeds. Camera 1, the living room. Camera 2, the kitchen. Camera 3, the master office. Brandon's office. I was inside. I watched as Vanessa walked into the frame in the living room. She wasn't alone. A man was with her. He was tall, wearing a suit that was too shiny. I recognized him instantly. Marcus Thorne, the chief financial officer of Brandon's company, the man who was supposed to be managing the company's books. They weren't grieving. They were clinking champagne glasses. To freedom, Vanessa said, laughing, and to the idiot old man enjoying the Greyhound bus. Marcus laughed with her. Did he sign the papers? The police served him this morning, Vanessa said, taking a sip. He's paralyzed. By the time Radcliffe gets back, we'll have liquidated the assets and moved the funds to the Cayman accounts. The house is already listed as a pocket listing. We'll sell it for cash. Quick close. I stared at the screen. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. They were planning to liquidate the company. My son's legacy. They were going to sell the house, take the money, and run. And they were doing it together. The CFO and the widow. It wasn't just greed. It was a conspiracy. Then, I saw something that made me stop breathing. Vanessa walked over to the mantelpiece. She picked up a small velvet box. It was Catherine's jewelry box. It contained her engagement ring, her pearls, the diamond necklace I gave her on our 25th anniversary. Items that were priceless, items that were supposed to go to Tyler's future wife one day. What about this junk? Vanessa asked. Pawn it, Marcus said, or melt it down. We don't want any trails. Vanessa opened the box. She pulled out the necklace. It's tacky anyway, old-fashioned. She tossed it into a purse sitting on the sofa. That was the moment the sadness evaporated completely. That was the moment the engineer was replaced by something much darker. You want to play games, Vanessa? I whispered to the screen. You want to steal my house, my grandson, and my wife's memory? I cracked my knuckles. I pulled up the command terminal. I am going to bring the entire roof down on your head, and you won't even see it coming. Before I launched my digital assault, I needed to make sure I had my real-world assets secured. I had to test the extent of Vanessa's net of lies. I needed to see if there was anyone left in the city who would stand by Albert Dunning. I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. The battery was draining, but the satellite laptop was charging it. I scrolled through my contact list. These were men I had known for decades, colleagues, banking executives, people who had shaken my hand and called me a genius. I decided to call George Henderson, the senior vice president at First National Bank. We had played golf together for 25 years. He knew my finances, he knew my family, and most importantly, he knew my mind. I dialed his direct line. It rang 3 times before he answered. "George Henderson," he said, his voice carrying the professional warmth of a man who managed millions. "George, it's Albert," I said, keeping my voice calm and controlled. "I have a situation. My joint accounts with Brandon have been frozen, and my personal credit cards are being declined. I need you to look into this immediately. I need access to my retirement funds, George. We have been friends for 30 years. We played golf every Saturday at the country club, and you know my signature by heart. There is some kind of mistake or fraud on my accounts." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The kind of pause that makes your stomach sink. "Albert," George said, and the warmth was completely gone from his voice. It was replaced by a cold, cautious distance. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you with that. The legal department flagged your accounts yesterday afternoon." "Flagged them? On what grounds, George?" "That is my money. The pension I earned over 40 years of hard labor. We received an official notification from Vanessa's legal counsel," George explained, and I could hear him shuffling papers on his desk. "They submitted a medical affidavit along with a police report. The affidavit outlines a preliminary diagnosis of advanced, aggressive dementia, citing recent erratic behavior and safety concerns. Under federal banking regulations, we are required to place a protective freeze on all assets to prevent potential financial exploitation or self-harm." I felt a cold wave of shock wash over me. "Dementia. George, you and I had dinner 2 weeks ago." Did I sound like a man with dementia? "This is a fraud. Vanessa is trying to steal the estate." "Albert, I'm not a doctor," George said, his voice dropping to a low, patronizing tone that made my blood boil. "And the bank has to protect itself. Vanessa sent us the police report from the cemetery. It says you attempted to assault a guard and threatened the child. With that kind of documentation, our hands are tied. Until you have a court-appointed guardian or a formal competency hearing to clear this up, the freeze stands." "George, listen to me. I have a meeting, Albert. I'm sorry. I hope you get the help you need." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My oldest banking ally had shut the door in my face based on a single email and a police report. I didn't stop there. I needed to know how deep the poison had run. I dialed Bill Masterson, the retired CEO of the engineering firm I had helped build. We were like brothers. We had spent 40 years building the skyline of Chicago together, calculating wind loads on the Sears Tower and designing structural skeletons for skyscrapers. Bill answered on the first ring. "Albert? Is that you, Bill? Thank God," I said, letting out a breath. "I'm in trouble. Vanessa has locked me out of the house, frozen my money, and she's telling everyone I have dementia. I need a lawyer, Bill, a real one. Radcliffe is out of the country, and Vanessa's junior associate is in her pocket. I need a loan to hire representation." Bill sighed, and the sound was filled with a heavy, painful pity. "I know I got the email this morning." My voice caught in my throat. "What email?" "Vanessa sent an email to the entire Dunning Tech alumni network and all our old associates," Bill said gently. "It was written as a family announcement. She wrote about Brandon's passing, and how the grief and the shock had pushed you over the edge. She said you had developed a severe persecution complex, that you were wandering the streets confused, and that you had tried to kidnap Tyler at the cemetery. She asked everyone to respect the family's privacy and warned us that you might reach out, looking for money or claiming there was a conspiracy against you. I sat in the dim motel room, the walls closing in on me. She had executed a perfect character assassination. She had poisoned the well before I could even draw water." "Bill, she is lying," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I am completely sane. She is trying to sell Brandon's company to Apex Dynamics and steal the money. She is going to abandon Tyler." "Al, please," Bill said, his voice thick with sorrow. "You need to rest. You've been through a terrible trauma. If you need a place, I can call a private facility in Wisconsin. I know the owner. They can help you. But I can't lend you money to fight a family battle. It's not right." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply ended the call and placed the phone on the table. She had built a cage of words, and the world had locked me inside it. To my friends, my bank, and my colleagues, I was already dead. I was just a ghost waiting for a nursing home. I looked at my hands. They were old, spotted with age, but they were the hands of a builder. They were steady. They thought the game was over because they had taken my pieces. They forgot that I was the one who designed the board. The next step was to contact the one man who could actually help me dismantle this legal fortress. Harrison Radcliffe. I knew he was in Switzerland, but I also knew how he operated. Harrison checked his personal, encrypted email every morning at 9 a.m. Swiss time. It was a habit he had kept for 30 years. I opened the laptop's mail client. I attached the video file of Vanessa and Marcus Thorne clinking champagne glasses, plotting the offshore transfer, and discussing the abandonment of Tyler. I also attached the audio recording of their conversation in the living room. I sent the email with the subject line, "The estate of Brandon Dunning. Direct evidence of corporate fraud and child exploitation." Then I waited. 3 hours later, the satellite phone on my laptop chimed. A secure video connection request appeared on the screen. It was Harrison. I clicked, except the screen showed Harrison's face. He wasn't in his ski gear. He was sitting in a wooden chalet, his face pale, his eyes sharp and burning with a cold, professional fury. "Albert," he said, his voice cutting through the speaker like a blade. "I have seen the files. I am already at the airport in Geneva. My private plane is fueling. I will be in Chicago by midnight." "Harrison," I said, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding for days. "Don't say anything, Albert." Harrison cut me off. "What they did to you, what they are planning to do to Brandon's legacy and to Tyler. It is the most despicable display of greed I have ever witnessed in my career. They timed this because they knew I was away. They thought they had a clear runway. They were wrong." "What is the legal status?" I asked. "Vanessa says the house is in her name. She's frozen the accounts." "The house is a secondary issue," Harrison said, leaning closer to the camera. "Brandon did refinance the estate last month, and Vanessa forced him to put her name on the deed. But Brandon wasn't stupid, Albert. He knew what she was. He came to see me 6 months ago, right after his first heart episode. He was terrified of what she would do to you and Tyler if he died." Harrison tapped a document on his desk. "We drafted a codicil, a secret addendum to his will. Vanessa believes that by inheriting Brandon's shares, she inherits the intellectual property of Dunning Tech. She believes she owns the patents, the code, the algorithms that run the company's simulations." "And she doesn't?" I asked, the engineer in me immediately searching for the structural loophole. "No," Harrison said with a cold, sharp smile. "Brandon separated the IP from the operating company. He transferred the ownership of the core technology, the structural analysis code you wrote, into a private holding trust. The trust's executive is you, Albert, and the sole beneficiaries are you, and Tyler Dunning Tech only has a licensing agreement to use that technology. And that license is revocable. Revocable upon what grounds?" I asked, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "It automatically revokes upon the death of the founder, or upon any attempt to sell, liquidate, or transfer majority control of Dunning Tech to a third party without the express written consent of the trust's executive," Harrison explained. "So," I said, the math completing itself in my head, "if Vanessa tries to sell the company to Apex Dynamics, the moment she signs the sale agreement, the license terminates instantly." Harrison finished. "The company she is selling becomes a useless shell. It owns the desks, the computers, the leases, but it loses the code. The product vanishes, and to facilitate the sale, Vanessa will have to sign personal warranties and guarantees that the company owns the IP. If she signs those guarantees and the IP vanishes, she will be in breach of contract. The buyers will sue her personally for the value of the merger plus damages. It will destroy her, Albert. She will owe $50 million that she cannot pay. She will be ruined for the rest of her life. But for this to work, she must sign," said. "She must believe she is winning." "Exactly," Harrison said. "She must walk into the closing meeting thinking you are broken and gone, and that I am still in Europe. I will contact her legal counsel tomorrow. I will tell them I am back and ready to expedite the reading of the will on Friday. I will play the part of the cooperative lawyer. Let them set the trap for themselves." "I will be ready," I said. "Stay hidden, Albert. Don't let them see you. I will have a security detail watching Tyler starting tonight. If she tries to move him, we step in. Thank you, Harrison, I said. I'm doing this for Brandon, Albert, and for you. I will see you on Friday. Harrison's plane landed at O'Hare at midnight. By 2 a.m., his assistant had delivered a secure package to my new motel room. Inside was a clean, dark suit, a white shirt, a tie, and $5 in cash. I had a new base of operations, a clean motel on the north side, where the water didn't run brown and the Wi-Fi was fast enough to run my compiler. I had the legal blueprints. Now, I needed to build the digital bait. Vanessa and Marcus Thorne were trying to move fast, but they were cautious. They needed to be sure that the Apex Dynamics deal was real before they committed themselves to the liquidation. I needed to give them a reason to discard their caution. I opened my command terminal. I wasn't going to hack their servers to destroy them. I was going to plant a seed of absolute, irresistible greed. I created a spoofed email sequence. I spent hours on the laptop, typing line after line of command codes, bypassing firewalls, and routing the traffic through 6 different proxy servers in California. I set up a domain that perfectly matched Apex Dynamics' corporate acquisitions department, using a digital signature that would pass Marcus's financial screening. I used the name of Jay Sterling, their director of mergers and acquisitions. I drafted the proposal. It was written in perfect corporate jargon. Subject: Acquisition Proposal. Dunning Technologies. Dear Mr. Thorne, following the tragic news of Brandon Dunning's passing, Apex Dynamics wishes to express its condolences. We also wish to formally open negotiations for a complete acquisition of Dunning Tech's assets and market share. We are prepared to offer an all-cash buyout of $120 million, contingent on a closing date within 10 days. We require consolidated ownership and clear title to all intellectual property. Please respond by Friday if you wish to proceed. $120 million. It was double the actual value of the company. It was a number calculated to bypass the critical thinking centers of their brains. I pressed send. I switched to the camera feeds on my laptop. I watched the living room of the Lake Forest estate. Marcus Thorne was sitting on the sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Vanessa was pacing, looking at her phone. Suddenly, the laptop on the desk in Brandon's office chimed. Marcus stood up and walked into the office. He looked at the screen. I watched his posture change. He froze. He leaned in, his face inches from the monitor. Vanessa! He called out, his voice sharp and tight. Get in here! Vanessa walked in, looking annoyed. What is it? Look at this, Marcus whispered, pointing at the screen. I watched her read the email. I saw her hands fly to her mouth. I saw her eyes go wide with a manic, wild excitement. 120 million. She gasped, Is this real? Marcus, is this real? The server signature is valid, Marcus said, his fingers flying across the keys. It's from Apex's corporate acquisition server. They want to close in 10 days, but they need clear title. They need the will read, and the transfer completed immediately. Call Radcliffe's office, Vanessa ordered, her voice trembling with greed. Tell them we want the reading on Friday. I don't care if he has to fly back from the moon. Tell them I will sign whatever I need to sign to get this done. We are going to be rich, Marcus. They were celebrating. They were laughing. They were walking right into the scaffolding. But their greed wasn't finished. An hour later, I watched the camera feed as they walked out of the main house toward the back of the property. Toward my annex, Marcus was carrying a red steel crowbar. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I turned on the audio feed. They reached the door of my guest annex. Marcus didn't even try the handle. He jammed the crowbar into the frame and threw his weight against it. The solid oak door splintered with a sickening crack. The sound tore through my heart. I had built that door with my own hands. They stepped inside, shaking the rain off their coats. Vanessa looked around the room, her nose wrinkled in disgust. Smells like old age and failure, she said, kicking a stack of my drafting magazines. Let's find those diamonds. The old fool kept his investment portfolio in a physical safe. He didn't trust banks. She was right. I had kept a reserve of unset, high-clarity diamonds in a safe behind my reading chair. Marcus walked over to the mahogany cabinet I had built for Catherine. The cabinet that held our family memories. He raised the crowbar. Don't, I whispered to the screen in the lonely motel room. Please don't, he swung. The mahogany shattered. The delicate mother-of-pearl inlays splintered into dust. He tore the door off the hinges and threw it to the floor. Vanessa reached inside and pulled out Catherine's blue velvet memory box. She dumped it onto the desk. The diamonds rolled out, glittering under the desk lamp. Marcus scooped them into his hand, his eyes shining. These are clean, easy to liquidate, no serial numbers. But Vanessa wasn't looking at the diamonds. She was looking at the letters. The letters I had written to Catherine when I was working in Alaska. The letters she had written to me, bound in a pink ribbon, faded with 40 years of love. Vanessa snapped the ribbon. She pulled out a letter and began to read it in a mocking, theatrical voice. My dearest Cat, the nights here are so cold without you. I would trade every beam of steel just to hold your hand for 1 minute. She laughed, a harsh barking sound. Listen to this garbage, Marcus. It is so pathetic. No wonder Brandon was so weak. He got it from his father. Marcus chuckled, putting the diamonds in his pocket. A sentimental fool. That's why he's rotting in a motel. Vanessa walked over to the wood stove in the corner of the room. She struck a match. She tossed the first letter inside. She lit the kindling. The fire caught instantly. The dry paper curled and turned to black ash. One by one, she threw them in. The letters about Brandon's first steps. The letters about our struggles. The final letter Catherine wrote to me before she died. Cleaning house, Vanessa muttered, watching the flames. I sat in the motel room, my hand squeezing a plastic cup of water. I was shaking with a rage so violent it felt like my chest would split open. The cup shattered in my grip. The plastic sliced deep into my palm. Blood welled up, dripping onto the floor, mixing with the water. I didn't feel it. The gentle old man who had walked out of the cemetery died in that room. The grandfather who wanted peace was gone. What was left was the engineer, the builder who knew exactly where to strike to make a structure collapse. Enjoy the fire, Vanessa, I whispered to the screen. Because I am going to burn your entire world to the ground. Friday morning was bright, cold and clear. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed in a sharp, unforgiving light. I stood in front of the mirror in Harrison's office bathroom. I was wearing the suit Harrison had sent me. It was dark, professional, and fits perfectly. The bruise on my cheek was still there, but it looked like a mark of battle, not a wound of defeat. My eyes were clear and steady. I walked into the main conference room through the service entrance at 9:55 a.m. Harrison was already there, adjusting his files on the long mahogany table. They are in the waiting room, Harrison said, his voice quiet and firm. They are practically vibrating with excitement. They have their own notary to speed up the transfer. Let's begin, I said. Harrison nodded and pressed the intercom. Bring them in. The double doors opened, and Vanessa and Marcus walked in. Vanessa was wearing a bright white designer suit, looking like she had already won the lottery. Marcus was walking beside her, carrying a leather briefcase, a confident smirk on his face. When Vanessa saw me sitting at the far end of the table, her smile vanished. Her face turned a sickly pale green. What is he doing here? She shrieked, pointing at me. I have a restraining order. He is not allowed within 500 feet of me. Call security. Sit down, Mrs. Dunning, Harrison said, his voice flat and commanding. Mr. Dunning is the executive of the trust that holds the core assets of Dunning Technologies. Under the terms of your late husband's will, the reading and the transfer of shares cannot proceed without him present. If you call security, the meeting is canceled and the probate will go to court for the next 5 years. Which means your pending merger with Apex Dynamics is dead. Vanessa glared at me, her eyes filled with venom. She slowly sat down, smoothing her skirt. Fine, let him stay. He gets nothing anyway. Let's read the will. I have a plane to catch. Harrison opened the blue folder, the red wax seal cracking with a loud snap. We are here to execute the last will and testament of Brandon Dunning, Harrison began. Item 1. To my wife, Vanessa Dunning, I leave the primary residence at 12 Oak Lane, subject to the outstanding mortgage held by First National Bank. Vanessa smirked, looking at me. Did you hear that, Albert? The house is mine, officially. Your little annex is my new tool shed. I didn't answer. Item 2. To my wife, Vanessa Dunning, I leave my controlling interest in Dunning Technologies, comprising 51% of the voting shares, Harrison continued. Vanessa clapped her hands. her eyes shining with greed. Yes, give me the papers, Harrison. I want to sign. This is exactly what Brandon owed me. This is the payoff for all those years of tolerating his technical talk. Harrison slid a thick stack of documents across the table. These are the transfer deeds and the personal assumption of liability forms. By signing these, you accept full ownership of the shares in the estate, along with all associated liabilities, outstanding debts, and contractual obligations. Vanessa grabbed the pen. She didn't read a single page. She flipped to the signature lines and signed her name in rapid, jagged strokes. Vanessa Dunning, Vanessa Dunning, Vanessa Dunning. She threw the pen onto the table. There, signed and delivered now. Where is the check, Harrison? Harrison took the papers back. He checked each signature carefully. Then, he placed them in his briefcase and closed the lid. Everything is in order, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, cold tone. You are now the majority shareholder of Dunning Tech. Perfect, Vanessa said, standing up. Come on, Marcus, we have to call Apex. One moment. Mrs. Dunning, Harrison said. We are not finished. There is a third item. An item concerning the intellectual property rights of the company. Marcus frowned, his confidence slipping. The company owns the IP, that is part of the shares. Actually, Mr. Thorne, that is a common misconception, Harrison said, pulling out the gray folder. Dunning Tech owns the brand and the contracts. But the structural integrity software, the algorithms that make the company valuable, were never owned by the corporation. They were licensed. Licensed from whom? Vanessa asked, her voice rising. From the creator, Harrison said, pointing his finger directly at me. From Mr. Albert Dunning. The room went dead silent. That is a lie. Vanessa screamed. Brandon wrote the code. Brandon managed the business, Vanessa, I said, standing up. My voice was deep and steady. I wrote the code, every line of it, in the annex while you were sleeping. I licensed it to Brandon for $1 a year, and that license contains a termination clause. It automatically revokes upon the death of the founder, or upon any attempt to transfer control of the company to a third party without my written consent. You just signed the papers transferring control, I said. The license is terminated, effective immediately. Marcus's face turned the color of old paper. He lunged for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. What did you do? The server logs, they are dumping the files. The database is locked. Without the algorithms, Dunning Tech is just a hollow shell, I said. The Apex deal is dead, then we file for Chapter 11. Vanessa screamed, her voice hysterical. I still have the house. I still have the estate. I'm afraid not, Mrs. Dunning, Harrison said, steepling his fingers. To accelerate the transfer of the shares, you signed a personal assumption of liability. You personally guaranteed the assets to Apex Dynamics to expedite the buyout. And since you cannot deliver the IP, you are in breach of contract. The penalty is $10 million. Plus the default fines on the active government contracts, which are now halted because the software is gone. That is another $40 million, conservative estimate, Vanessa, Harrison said with a cold smile. You currently owe $50 million. Personally, the bank is already foreclosing on the house. The creditors are seizing your assets. You have nothing. Vanessa stared at the papers she had signed. Her chest was heaving. She looked at Marcus. Marcus, you told me to sign, she whispered. I didn't know, Marcus screamed, packing his things. I didn't know the old man owned the code. This is on you, Vanessa. I quit. He bolted for the door, leaving her there. Vanessa turned to me, her eyes filled with a desperate, wild terror. Albert, please, you can't do this. I will go to prison. I will be on the street. You should have thought about that before you threw me into the mud, I said coldly. And before you burned Catherine's letters. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the floor in a heap of white silk, fainted from the sheer shock of her own destruction. The paramedics arrived 10 minutes later, squeaking their boots on the polished floor as they lifted Vanessa onto a gurney. As they wheeled her out, her eyes opened, and she saw the 2 police officers waiting for her. You are under arrest for grand larceny and embezzlement, the detective said, flashing his badge. I handed him the flash drive, containing the camera footage of her safe break-in and the theft of the diamonds. She started to scream, a wild animal sound of entitlement being crushed by reality. but the elevator doors closed, silencing her wails. Marcus Thorne didn't get far. I had tracked his phone's GPS and sent his coordinates to the airport police. They arrested him at gate K12 as he was trying to board a flight to Zurich. They found Catherine's diamonds in his socks. 3 weeks later, the bank foreclosed on the estate at 12 Oak Lane. I walked into the bank manager's office, wrote a check for the outstanding mortgage plus $1, and bought the house back for cash. I drove up the long driveway. The next morning, I walked to the back of the property, to my guest annex. The door was still broken, the room filled with the ash from the stove. I knelt down and touched the cold wood of the stove. The letters were gone, but I realized I didn't need the paper. Catherine was in my head, not in the ash. The physical memories were destroyed, but the love we shared was something Vanessa could never burn. It was built into the foundation of my life, a structure that was impervious to her greed. I drove to the apartment complex on the other side of town. Sarah, the nanny, opened the door, looking terrified. Vanessa had fired her via text, leaving her with no money and a confused little boy. "Mr. Dunning," she stammered, "I didn't know what to do. You kept him safe, Sarah," I said gently. "You did good." I looked past her. Tyler was sitting on the floor, playing with his Legos. He saw me and dropped the brick. "Grandpa," he whispered. I fell to my knees, opening my arms. He ran to me, hitting me like a freight train, crying into my neck. "I thought you went away," he sobbed. "I had to fix something broken, Tyler," I whispered, holding him tight. "But I'm back now, and we are going home." We drove back to the estate as the sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and copper. The light caught the windows of the skyscrapers I had helped build, glowing like beacons of triumph over the city. We walked up the front steps of the main house together, Sarah walking by our side. I told her that she would stay with us, that Tyler needed her, and that she would have a permanent place in our family with a salary that reflected her loyalty. She cried tears of relief and nodded. The foyer was empty of Vanessa's expensive, tasteless purchases, which had been hauled away by the sheriff's department as evidence of embezzlement and stolen funds. The house felt massive and echoing, but it no longer felt toxic. It felt clean, like a site cleared for new construction. We sat on the floor of the living room in front of the fireplace, eating pizza from a box. I had lit a fire, not a fire to destroy letters and memories, but a warm, crackling fire to welcome us back. The orange light danced on the walls, chasing away the long shadows of the past week. Tyler fell asleep, with his head resting on my lap, exhausted by the grief and the sudden relief of being back with his grandfather. I gently stroked his hair, which was the exact same color and texture as Brandon's had been when he was a boy. I looked around the room, feeling the steady thrum of the house. I was 73 years old. I had lost my wife. I had buried my only son. I had been humiliated, locked out of my bank, and thrown into the cemetery mud. But as I sat there, listening to the crackle of the embers and the peaceful rhythmic breathing of my grandson, I realized I had saved the only thing that truly mattered. I had secured the future. Vanessa was sitting in a concrete cell, surrounded by nothing but the debt of her choices. Marcus was awaiting trial in a county jail, realizing that his quick exit had led him straight into a dead end. I was sitting in my home, surrounded by a legacy I had fought with every ounce of my mind to protect. There was no gloating in my heart. There was no need to celebrate their downfall. The silence of the house was no longer lonely. It was peaceful. It was the quiet, steady hum of a foundation that had held firm against the most brutal storm. "We are okay, Catherine," I whispered into the dying firelight, resting my hand on Tyler's shoulder. "We are okay." This story stands as a warning to those who think silence is weakness, or that age is synonymous with obsolescence. Vanessa looked at me and saw only a disposable relic, failing to realize that the very foundation of her lifestyle was engineered by the hands she tried to slap away. She let greed blind her to the structural integrity of family, duty, and honor. True power does not need to shout or make threats. It waits, it calculates, and it strikes with the absolute precision of truth. In the end, gravity always wins. What is built on lies must inevitably collapse under its own weight. If you believe that justice is the strongest foundation of all, and that family always comes first, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening. And until next time, take care of those who matter most.